The kitchen clock has a specific rhythm, a heavy mechanical thrum that I've timed to my own heartbeat over the last 40 years. I designed this house. I know where the floorboards groan under a light step and where the insulation is thin enough to let a whisper travel from the pantry to the study. To my family, I'm just a part of the architecture now. I am the old man in the wing-back chair, as stationary and unobservant as a coat rack. They don't realize that when you stop talking, your ears become incredibly sharp. When the world decides you are no longer worth explaining things to, you start to hear the things they never intended to say. It started on a Tuesday, exactly 2 years ago. My son, Julian, was at the firm I built from a single pickup truck and a toolbox, which he now manages with a frantic, insecure energy. My daughter-in-law, Elena, was home. Elena is 30 years younger than me and 15 years younger than Julian. She moves through this house like a predator who has forgotten she's being watched. My younger brother Marcus had dropped by again. Marcus has made a career out of being the charming younger sibling who just needs a little bridge loan to get to the next big thing. I've been that bridge for 50 years. I have carried his debts, his divorces, and his failures on my back until my spine curved under the weight of his incompetence. I was in the library, the door pulled to within an inch of the frame. I wasn't hiding. I was simply existing in the space I paid for. "He's sleeping," Elena's voice drifted through the ventilation duct. It's a quirk of the HVAC system I never fixed. A direct acoustic line from the kitchen island to the library's east wall. "He's always sleeping," Marcus replied. I could hear the sound of a glass clinking against the granite counter. My scotch. The 18-year-old McAllen I save for Sundays, or staring at those blueprints. He's a ghost, Elena. The only difference is a ghost doesn't require a trust fund to keep the lights on. There was a pause, a wet, sliding sound, the sound of someone leaning in close. "Julian is stressed," Elena said, her voice dropping into a register I hadn't heard her use with my son in years. It was thick with a predatory sweetness. "He thinks the board is going to push him out if the quarterly numbers don't move. He's so focused on the money that he doesn't see what's right in front of him." "And what's right in front of him?" Marcus asked. I heard the distinct sound of a stool scraping. Then a sharp, stifled intake of breath. "A woman who is tired of waiting for an inheritance that's being guarded by a man who refuses to die," Elena whispered. I sat very still. My hand, liver-spotted and steady, remained on the arm of my chair. I didn't feel the surge of anger I expected. Instead, I felt a cold, crystalline clarity. I looked at the grandfather clock in the corner, the one I wind every morning at 6 a.m. I realized then that I wasn't just a father, a brother, or a grandfather. I was a hurdle. I was the lock on a door they were both trying to kick down. "He's got at least 10 years left in him," Marcus said, his voice closer now, muffled by what I assumed was a kiss. "The doctors say his heart is like a tractor engine. He'll outlive us all just to spite us." "Not if he loses the will," Elena murmured. "Not if the house becomes uncomfortable. Julian already thinks he's becoming senile. It wouldn't take much to convince the doctors that he's a danger to himself. A few missed pills, a few accidental fires in the kitchen. We could have him in the memory care wing of the Willows by Christmas." "And the power of attorney?" "Julian already has the paperwork. He's just too noble to sign it without a reason. We just have to give him the reason, Marcus." I listened to the sound of my brother laughing, a low, melodic sound that I used to find comforting when we were children, sharing a bedroom in our parents' cramped apartment. It was the sound of the person I had protected my entire life, deciding that my existence was an inconvenience. They think I am a silent patriarch. They think silence is a void, a vacuum where thoughts used to be. They don't understand that silence is a workshop. I didn't move for an hour after they left the kitchen. I stayed in the dim light of the library, watching the dust motes dance in a stray beam of sun. I thought about the foundations of this house. I thought about the structural integrity of a family built on the labor of one man and the greed of everyone else. If you remove the load-bearing wall of a house, the roof doesn't fall immediately. There is a groan, a shifting of weight, a terrifying second of realization where the wood screams before it snaps. I am the load-bearing wall of this family, and I've just decided to move. Dinner that evening was a masterclass in choreographed deception. Elena had prepared a pot roast, the scent of rosemary and red wine thick in the air. A comfort meal, she called it. She moved around the dining room with an effortless grace, her silk sleeves fluttering like the wings of a moth. She smiled at me, a soft, rehearsed expression that never quite reached her eyes. "How was your walk today, Arthur?" she asked, resting a hand briefly on my shoulder as she set down my plate. The touch felt like a brand. I remembered her voice from the pantry, "Not if he loses the will." I looked down at the meat, perfectly seared, and thought about the missed pills she had mentioned. "I didn't go for a walk," I said quietly. My voice was raspy, a side effect of disuse. "I spent the afternoon in the library." I saw the briefest flicker of movement in her jaw, a micro-tension. "Oh? I thought I saw you heading toward the gardens." "You must be getting forgetful, dear. Perhaps we should start keeping a log of your activities, just so we know you're safe." Beside her, my son Julian didn't look up from his phone. He was gray-faced, the skin under his eyes sagging. He was 45, but in this light, he looked 60. He was drowning in the company I gave him, gasping for air in an office he didn't earn, and he was taking his resentment out on the man who had paved the road for him. "Elena's right, Dad," Julian muttered, finally stabbing a potato. "You've been distant. The board members asked about you the other day. I didn't know what to tell them." "Tell them I'm retired, Julian," I said. "Retirement is a state of observation, not an absence of mind." Marcus arrived 10 minutes late, as he always did, bringing a bottle of cheap wine that he'd likely put on my tab at the local cellar. He sat across from me, radiating that easy, false warmth that had fooled me for 5 decades. "Arthur, you're looking robust," Marcus boomed, reaching for the bread. "I was just telling Elena today that you've got the constitution of a mountain. Although I did notice you left the garage door open again. I closed it for you. Can't have the neighborhood seeing the king's treasures, can we?" The lie was seamless. I hadn't opened the garage door in 3 days. He was already laying the groundwork, seeding Julian's mind with the image of a father who was losing his grip on the simplest tasks. I looked at the 3 of them, my brother, my son, my daughter-in-law, and I realized that the dinner table was no longer a place of communion. It was a courtroom where I had already been found guilty of living too long. Children rarely notice a father disappearing until the things he paid for start disappearing with him. They think the money, the house, and the security are natural resources, like oxygen or sunlight. They don't realize these things are managed, they are curated, they are held. "I'm thinking of changing my will," I said, my voice cutting through their hollow chatter like a cold wind. The silence that followed was absolute. Marcus froze with a piece of bread halfway to his mouth. Elena's wine glass stopped mid-air. Julian finally looked at me, his eyes wide and sharp with a sudden, predatory hunger. "Changing it?" Julian asked, trying to sound casual, though his voice cracked. Why would you do that, Dad? It's all settled. Everything is in the trust. A trust is a living document, I said, taking a slow sip of water. I've been thinking about the legacy of this family, about who truly respects the foundation I built, and who is merely waiting for the concrete to dry so they can walk over it. I looked directly at Marcus. He laughed, a nervous, jagged sound. Arthur, don't be so dramatic. We all love you. We're just worried about your health. My health is fine, Marcus. It's my vision that's improved. I see things much more clearly now than I did even a week ago. I saw Elena and Marcus exchange a look, a fast, telepathic flash of panic. They thought they had time. They thought they were the ones playing the game. They didn't realize I had just turned the board over. That night, I didn't go to sleep. I waited until the house went dark. I waited until the rhythmic creaks of the floorboards told me Julian and Elena were in their wing, and Marcus was settled in the guest suite he treated like his own personal hotel. I walked to my study, but I didn't turn on the lights. I sat in the dark, staring at the safe behind the portrait of my late wife, Martha. Martha, who had seen the rot in Marcus long before I did. She had warned me. Arthur, you can't fix a man who enjoys being broken, she had said. I hadn't listened. I had been too busy being the good brother, the stable father. I reached into the pocket of my robe and pulled out a small, digital voice recorder I'd bought months ago to record my memoirs. I hadn't used it for memoirs. I hit play on the recording from earlier that afternoon in the pantry. Julian already thinks he's becoming senile. It wouldn't take much to convince the doctors. A few missed pills, a few accidental fires in the kitchen. I listened to Elena's voice, cold and sharp as a razor, and then I heard the sound of them kissing. But it was the sound that followed that broke the last string of my hesitation. It was the sound of my brother Marcus whispering, "Once he's in the home, Elena, I'll handle the liquid assets. Julian won't even know they're gone. We'll leave him the house and the debt, and we'll be halfway to the coast before the first audit." They weren't just betraying me. Marcus was preparing to strip his own nephew of his inheritance, and Elena was helping him. They were a circle of vultures, each waiting for the other to blink. I turned the recorder off. I stood up and went to the window, looking out at the sprawling acres of the estate. Tomorrow, Julian was taking me to a routine checkup with a new doctor, a man Elena had recommended. I knew what that appointment was. It was the beginning of the end, or at least they thought it was. I reached for the telephone on my desk. I didn't call the police. I didn't call a lawyer. I called the only person Marcus feared more than me. A man I hadn't spoken to in 15 years. A man who dealt in the kind of truths that don't just ruin reputations, but erase lives. As the phone rang, I looked at the photograph of Julian on my desk, a picture of him as a toddler, holding my hand. I felt a tear track down my cheek, not for the son I had, but for the ghost of the man I thought he would become. "Hello?" a voice answered on the other end. "It's Arthur," I said. "I need to perform a demolition, and I need it to look like an act of God. The most dangerous thing about a trap isn't the teeth, it's the bait. And for 2 years I had been the perfect bait, pliant, predictable, and increasingly invisible." Wednesday morning arrived with a thin gray mist that clung to the oaks outside my window. I sat at my vanity, meticulously shaving. My hands did not shake. They haven't shaken a day in my life, a fact I've carefully hidden lately by keeping them tucked in my pockets or resting them on my knees whenever Julian or Elena were in the room. If they wanted a frail old man, I was happy to provide the performance. A soft knock came at the door. Elena entered without waiting for an answer. She was wearing a cream-colored wrap dress, looking every bit the concerned, dutiful daughter-in-law. "Good morning, Arthur," she said, her voice a practiced melody of faux concern. She walked to my bedside table and picked up the small plastic cup containing my morning supplements. "I noticed you didn't take these yet. You've been so forgetful lately. We really need to stay on top of your regimen." I looked at the pills. 2 of them were my usual vitamins. The third was a small, oblong blue tablet I didn't recognize. "What is the blue one, Elena?" I asked, my voice flat. "Just something Dr. Aris prescribed to help with your evening agitation," she said, moving closer. She smelled of expensive lilies and something metallic, like a sharpened blade. "You've been wandering the halls at night, dear. Julian is worried you'll fall." I hadn't wandered the halls once. I had sat in my study with the lights off, but to them, any movement they didn't authorize was a symptom of decay. I took the cup from her. I felt her eyes on me, intense, hungry. She wasn't waiting for me to get better. She was waiting for the chemical fog to settle in, so she could lead me where she wanted me to go. I put the pills in my mouth, took a sip of water and swallowed. I saw the tension leave her shoulders. She didn't see the pill tucked under my tongue, a trick I'd learned from my father when he was dodging the medicine my mother used to force on him during his final days. "Julian is waiting in the car," she said, patting my hand. "We want to get to the clinic early. Dr. Sterling is the best in the state for cognitive transitions." Cognitive transitions. A beautiful euphemism for the slow erasure of a human soul. The drive to the clinic was silent. Julian gripped the steering wheel of the Mercedes I had bought him for his 40th birthday, so hard his knuckles were white. He wouldn't look at me in the rearview mirror. "The office is doing well, Julian?" I asked. "Fine, Dad, just fine," he snapped. "Don't worry about the office. You just need to focus on getting your head right." "I see. And Marcus? Is he still consulting for you?" Julian's jaw tightened. "Marcus is family. He's helping me navigate some of the more complex transitions you left behind. You made things very difficult with those offshore accounts, Dad. It's a mess." The mess was a series of ironclad legal structures designed to protect the company from exactly the kind of looting Marcus was currently attempting. Julian didn't see the complexity as a shield. He saw it as an insult to his intelligence. He wanted it simple. He wanted it liquid. He wanted it gone. We arrived at a glass and steel building that looked more like a high-end spa than a medical facility. Dr. Sterling was a man with silver hair and a smile that felt like a scripted event. He spent 40 minutes asking me basic questions. Who is the president? What day is it? Can you draw a clock face? I deliberately drew the clock face with the numbers slightly skewed. I hesitated when he asked me the year. I watched him make a note on his digital tablet. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw Elena and Julian exchange a quick, triumphant glance. "Arthur," Dr. Sterling said, leaning forward, "your family is very concerned about your safety. They've mentioned several incidents of disorientation. Fires in the kitchen, leaving the house in the middle of the night." "I don't recall any fires," I said, pitching my voice to be just high enough to sound defensive and confused. "Exactly," Elena whispered, leaning in. "He doesn't even remember. Last week, the stove was left on for hours. If I hadn't come home..." She was a gifted liar. I almost admired the conviction in her voice. "I think," Sterling said, looking at Julian, "that for Arthur's own protection, we should begin the process of a formal competency evaluation. In the meantime, I'm going to recommend a transition to a managed care environment. Somewhere he can be monitored 24 hours a day." "The Willows?" Julian asked. "It's the best," Sterling confirmed. I sat there, the senile old man, while they discussed my life as if I were a piece of furniture that no longer fit the decor. It is a peculiar kind of torture to be spoken about in the third person while you are sitting in the room. They strip you of your humanity before they even strip you of your rights. "I have a request," I said, interrupting them. They all stopped and looked at me. Julian looked annoyed. Elena looked bored. "I'd like to have one last dinner at the house," I said. "Tonight. All of us. Marcus too. If I'm to be moved, I want to say goodbye to the home I built." "Of course, Dad," Julian said, his voice dripping with a sudden, nauseating kindness. "Whatever makes it easier for you." "Good," I said, "and I'd like to see the new blueprints for the downtown project, the one Julian is so worried about. I want to see what my legacy looks like before the lights go out." Elena smiled. It was the smile of a cat who had finally trapped the mouse in the corner. "I'll make sure the blueprints are on the dining table, Arthur. And I'll make something special. A farewell meal." As we walked out of the clinic, I felt the weight of the little blue pill still tucked under my tongue. I waited until they were looking away, then spat it into a tissue and tucked it into my pocket. They thought they had won. They thought the cognitive transition was nearly complete. What they didn't know was that while they were at the clinic, the man I had called the night before, a forensic accountant with a grudge against Marcus that went back 2 decades, was currently sitting in my library. He wasn't looking at blueprints. He was looking at the digital trail of every cent Marcus had stolen from the firm over the last 18 months, and the secret bank account Elena had opened in the Cayman Islands 3 weeks ago. The dinner tonight wasn't a farewell. It was an autopsy, and I was the one holding the scalpel. When we returned from the clinic, the house felt different. It was no longer a home. It was a crime scene in the making. Julian and Elena were light on their feet, energized by the medical verdict they had essentially purchased. They moved through the foyer with a new sense of ownership, their voices a little louder, their glances toward the antique furniture a little more proprietary. I walked past them, leaning heavily on my cane, playing the part of the defeated king. I retreated to the library. Elias was gone, as we had agreed, but he had left a single manila folder tucked inside a 1924 edition of The Great Gatsby. I opened it with fingers that were as steady as a surgeon's. Inside were bank statements. Not mine, Elena's. It's a peculiar thing to see the price of your own life laid out in black and white. For the last 18 months, Elena had been funneling maintenance funds from the estate into a shell company registered in her maiden name. But it wasn't just the money. There were travel bookings. 2 tickets to Amalfi, one for Elena, one for Marcus. The dates were set for 3 days after I was scheduled to be moved into the Willows. They weren't even going to wait for the body to be cold. They were going to dance on the grave while the dirt was still loose. And Julian? My son, the man who carried my name? According to the internal memos Elias had pulled from the firm, Marcus had been restructuring the company's debt in a way that left Julian legally liable for millions in unpaid taxes. Marcus wasn't just taking my money. He was setting Julian up to be the fall guy. He was taking the wife, the fortune, and leaving my son with the prison sentence. I sat there in the fading afternoon light, the weight of the folder heavy on my lap. I felt a sudden, sharp pang of grief, not for myself, but for the boy Julian used to be. The boy who used to follow me into the workshop and hand me wrenches, his eyes full of a quiet, uncomplicated hero worship. Where did that boy go? At what point does a son stop seeing his father as a man and start seeing him as a bank vault? "Arthur, are you in there?" He didn't wait for an answer. He pushed the door open, radiating that oily frat boy charm that had served him so well for 60 years. He had a glass of my scotch in his hand. Always my scotch. "Just resting, Marcus. I said, sliding the folder back into the book with a practiced, slow movement. Good, good. You've had a big day. A lot of big changes coming. He walked over and sat on the edge of my desk, an act of casual disrespect that he wouldn't have dared 5 years ago. Listen, Artie, Julian is a bit overwhelmed with the paperwork for the Willows. I told him I'd help him out. I'll need your signature on a few transfer documents, just to keep the estate fluid while you're away. Fluid, I repeated. Like water through a sieve. Marcus laughed, patting his chest. Always the poet. It's for the best, brother. You've worked hard. You deserve to sit in a garden and let someone else worry about the plumbing. I've found a buyer for the downtown lot, by the way. A quick sale. It'll cover the entry fees for the facility and then some. The downtown lot was the centerpiece of the family trust. It was meant for my grandchildren. I'd like to see the contract for that sale, Marcus. At dinner? Sure, he said, his eyes darting away. If you think you're up for it. Elena is making that roast you like. Or was it the lamb? She's so devoted to you, Artie. You really lucked out with her. I know exactly how lucky I am, I said. He finished his drink and stood up. Wear that blue tie, the one Martha bought you. Julian always liked you in that one. Let's make it a nice family memory, eh? He left the room, his footsteps light and jaunty. He was already spending the money in his head. I stood up and walked to the window. I watched the sun dip below the tree line, casting long, skeletal shadows across the lawn. The cruelest thing a child, or a brother, can do is treat a man's life like a countdown. They think because I am old, my time has less value. They think because I am quiet, I am no longer the architect of their world. I went upstairs to change. As I passed my own bedroom, I saw the door was ajar. I stopped. The sound of rustling fabric came from within. I peeked through the gap. Elena was in there. She wasn't cleaning. She was standing in front of my late wife's jewelry box, the one I keep locked, the one that holds the pearls Martha wore on our wedding day. Elena had a small velvet bag on the bed. She was systematically emptying the box into the bag. She picked up Martha's engagement ring, a modest diamond, but one I had worked 3 jobs to buy in 1968. She held it up to the light, a look of pure, cold calculation on her face. Then, she slipped it onto her own finger. She admired her hand, turning it this way and that. Soon, she whispered to her reflection in the mirror. I stood in the hallway, the shadows hiding me. My heart didn't race. My breath didn't hitch. I felt a profound, icy stillness settle into my bones. I didn't confront her. I didn't burst in and demand she put it back. To do so would be to reveal that I was still a player in their game. Instead, I waited until she finished and left through the servants' stairs. I entered my room. It felt violated, the air smelling of her perfume, that cloying, metallic lily scent. I walked over to the vanity and looked at the empty spaces in the jewelry box. Then, I noticed something else. On my pillow sat a small white envelope. No name on the front. I opened it. Inside was a single photograph. It was a grainy, long-lens shot of Elena and Marcus. They weren't in a kitchen. They were in a hotel room. They weren't talking. But it wasn't the image that froze my blood. It was the note written on the back, in a handwriting I recognized instantly. The cramped, nervous script of my son, Julian. I know, Dad. I've known for months. And tonight, I'm going to make sure none of us ever have to look at each other again. I stared at the words until they blurred. I had thought I was the only one holding a secret. I had thought I was the only one planning a demolition. But as the grandfather clock chimed 7 p.m. downstairs, signaling the start of our last dinner, I realized the house was far more unstable than I had imagined. Julian wasn't just a victim. He was a ticking bomb. I descended the grand staircase with a deliberate slowness, my hands sliding over the polished mahogany banister I've waxed myself for 40 years. Down in the foyer, the air was heavy with the scent of Elena's roast, rosemary, garlic, and the faint, acrid undertone of something scorched. The dining room was lit by the crystal chandelier, throwing 1,000 fractured shards of light across the table. It looked like a stage set for a tragedy. Marcus was already seated, leaning back with a glass of my scotch, his feet crossed at the ankles. Elena was fussing over the centerpiece, her movements jerky, frantic, and Julian was at the head of the table, staring into the depths of a wine glass that was already half empty. He looked like a man standing on the edge of a cliff, deciding whether to jump or be pushed. "Ah, the man of the hour!" Marcus cheered, raising his glass. "You look sharp, Artie. That blue tie really does the trick. Makes you look respectable, dignified, like a man who's ready for a rest." I took my seat at the foot of the table, opposite Julian. Between us lay the blueprints for the downtown project and a thick stack of legal documents, the transfer papers Marcus wanted me to sign. "I see you brought the homework, Marcus," I said, my voice steady, echoing slightly in the high-ceilinged room. "Just a few formalities, Dad," Julian said. His voice was a dry rattle. He didn't look up. He was wearing a dark suit, his collar open, the skin of his neck flushed red. "The board needs the signatures by tomorrow morning to ensure the transition is seamless." "Transitions are rarely seamless, Julian," I said. "Usually something has to be torn to make room for the new." Elena arrived with the roast, placing it in the center of the table with a flourish. She was still wearing the cream dress. I looked at her hands. She wasn't wearing Martha's ring anymore. She'd tucked it away, no doubt. But she was wearing a new bracelet, a gold chain I hadn't seen before. A gift from Marcus, perhaps? Or a trophy from her recent acquisitions in my bedroom? "Let's eat first," Elena said, her voice high and tight. "The business can wait until the wine has settled our nerves." She began to carve. The silver knife slid through the meat with a sickening ease. She served me first, the largest slice. I watched the juices run red across the white china. "You're not eating, Julian?" I asked. My son looked at his plate, then at Elena, then at Marcus. The look in his eyes was one of profound, agonizing loathing. "I'm not hungry, Dad. I've had a lot on my mind." "We all have," Marcus said, his mouth full of bread. "But tonight is about celebrating. To a new chapter. To Arthur's comfort. To the future of the firm." "The future," I said, picking up my fork. I didn't eat. I moved a piece of potato from one side of the plate to the other. "It's a funny thing, Marcus. We spend our lives building a future for our children, only to realize that the future they want is one where we don't exist." The table went quiet. The only sound was the rhythmic tick-tock of the grandfather clock in the hall. "Arthur, don't be morbid," Elena said, reaching out to touch my hand. I pulled it back before she could make contact. Her smile faltered. "I was looking at the downtown blueprints earlier," I said, nodding toward the papers. "I noticed some changes. The foundation specs have been lowered. The structural steel is downgraded. It looks like someone is trying to save about $4 million in materials." Marcus cleared his throat, his jovial mask slipping. "Just value engineering, Artie. Modernizing the costs." "It's not engineering, Marcus. It's a collapse waiting to happen. If you build on a compromised foundation, the building might stand for a year, maybe two. But eventually, the weight of the truth becomes too much for the lies to hold up. And then, everyone inside pays the price. I looked at Julian. He was staring at me now. His eyes were bloodshot, swimming with tears he refused to let fall. "Is that what happened to us, Dad?" Julian whispered. "Is the foundation just gone?" "The foundation was fine, Julian," I said. "It was the termites. The ones who move in while you're busy working, eating the wood from the inside out until there's nothing left but a shell that looks like a home." I turned my gaze to Elena. "How was the shopping today, Elena? I noticed you were in my room earlier. Looking for something sentimental?" She froze. The color drained from her face, leaving her looking skeletal under the chandelier light. I was just tidying up, Arthur. You know how the maids can be." "I do know. I also know that Martha's engagement ring is currently in a velvet bag in the servants' quarters, along with 3 of my watches and the bearer bonds from the floor safe." Marcus stood up, his chair screeching against the hard wood. "Now hold on a minute, Arthur. You're clearly confused. This is exactly what the doctor was talking about. Disorientation, accusations. You're having an episode." "I've never been more lucid, Marcus," I said. "In fact, I'm so lucid that I spent the afternoon talking to a friend of yours. A man named Mr. Henderson from the tax board. He was very interested in those restructuring memos you've been signing Julian's name to." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. Marcus's face turned a mottled purple. Julian looked at Marcus, his mouth hanging open. "What?" Julian breathed. "What memos?" "The ones that make you the sole responsible party for the offshore tax evasion, Julian," I said, my voice filled with a pity that tasted like ash. "Your uncle was never planning on sharing the inheritance with you. He was planning on using you as a shield while he and your wife moved to Amalfi." Julian's head snapped toward Elena. She didn't deny it. She didn't scream. She simply leaned back in her chair, the dutiful daughter-in-law mask finally falling away to reveal the cold, hard predator beneath. "He's a weak man, Julian," Elena said, her voice flat. "You've always been weak. Your father built a kingdom, and you just sat in the throne crying because it was too big for you. Marcus knows how to lead." "Lead?" Julian choked out a laugh, a jagged, broken sound. "He's been sleeping with you in my own guest house. I saw the cameras, Elena. I saw everything." Marcus took a step toward Julian, his hands balled into fists. "Shut up, Julian. You don't know what you're talking about. You're drunk." "I'm not drunk!" Julian roared, standing up so quickly his wineglass overturned, red liquid spreading across the blueprints like a bloodstain. "I'm finished! I'm finished with all of you!" He reached into his suit jacket. My heart finally gave a single heavy thud. I thought of the note. "I'm going to make sure none of us ever have to look at each other again." Julian didn't pull out a gun. He pulled out a small amber glass vial. "I made the wine, Elena," Julian said, his voice dropping to a terrifying, calm whisper. "I opened the bottles before you even came downstairs. I thought, if we're a family of vipers, we should all go out together." He looked at me, his eyes full of an ancient, agonizing regret. "I'm sorry, Dad. I didn't want you to see this. But you're already dying in this house. We all are." I looked down at the wine glass in front of me. I had taken a sip earlier, just a small one. The room began to tilt. The edges of my vision started to fray into a dull, pulsing gray. I looked at Marcus, who was clutching his stomach, his face turning a sickly shade of gray. I looked at Elena, who was staring at her own half-empty glass in horror. "A house doesn't fall because the wind is strong," I whispered, the words feeling heavy in my mouth. "It falls because the foundation was tired of holding the lie." Then the lights didn't just flicker, they went out, not because of the poison, but because I had already called the power company that morning to shut off the service at 7:30 p.m. In the sudden, absolute darkness of the dining room, I heard the sound of someone gasping for air, and the heavy thud of a body hitting the floor. Darkness is not just the absence of light, it is the presence of truth. In the blackness of that dining room, the social masks we had worn for decades didn't just slip, they dissolved. I sat perfectly still at the foot of the table. My heart was a slow, heavy pendulum. I felt the slight bitterness of the wine on the back of my tongue, a metallic tang that signaled Julian's desperation. But I didn't panic. I have lived long enough to know that the things people do when they are finished are usually just cries for the attention they never received. In the dark, the sounds were visceral. Marcus was heaving, a wet, panicked sound of a man who had spent his life consuming and was now terrified of being consumed. Elena was gasping, her chair clattering as she backed away from the table. "Julian?" she shrieked, her voice cracking like thin glass. "Julian, what did you do? You're insane. We were trying to help him." "Help him?" Julian's voice came from the head of the table, sounding hollow, as if he were speaking from the bottom of a well. "You were helping yourself to his life. You were helping Marcus to my wife. You were helping me into a coffin while I was still trying to find my way home." "I'm calling an ambulance," Marcus wheezed. I heard the rustle of fabric, the frantic tapping of a finger on a smartphone screen. I can't breathe. "Julian, you idiot, you've killed us all." "The phones won't work, Marcus," I said. My voice was a low, steady anchor in the chaos. I had a signal jammer installed in the library this morning, for my cognitive peace, as the doctor suggested. No calls go out. No calls come in. We are quite alone. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the blood rushing in my ears. "Dad?" Julian whispered. You're still talking." "I am, Julian. And you're not dying. Neither is Marcus. Neither is Elena." I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, high-powered LED flashlight I had hidden there. I clicked it on and set it on the table, pointing it toward the ceiling. The reflected light cast long, monstrous shadows against the walls, illuminating the wreckage of our dinner. Marcus was on his knees, clutching his chest, his face slick with sweat. Elena was pressed against the sideboard, her eyes wide and feral. Julian was slumped in his chair, the amber vial clutched in a trembling hand. "It was an emetic, Julian," I said, looking at my son. "I saw you in the wine cellar this afternoon. I saw you shaking. I saw you with the vial. I switched it while you were upstairs composing that note for my pillow. You didn't put poison in the wine. You put a very high dose of a sedative that would have made us sleep for 12 hours. I simply replaced it with something that would make Marcus feel the physical weight of his own bile." Marcus let out a ragged groan and slumped further. "You knew?" Julian asked, his voice breaking. "You knew about the note? About Elena and Marcus?" "I have known everything for a long time, Julian. I knew when Marcus started skimming the payroll. I knew when Elena started visiting him in the guest house under the guise of bringing him extra linens. I even knew when you started drinking in your office at 10 in the morning, because you couldn't bear to look at the ledger or your wife." I stood up, the light from the flashlight carving deep hollows into my face. I looked like a specter in my own home. "You all thought I was the problem," I said, walking slowly toward Marcus. I looked down at him, this man I had protected from the world for 50 years. You thought my life was a debt you were entitled to collect, but a father's life isn't a loan, Marcus. It's a foundation. And when you start chipping away at the foundation to pay for your own rot, the whole structure loses its purpose. I turned to Elena. She looked at me with pure, unadulterated hatred. "You're a monster," she spat. "You sat there and let us. You watched us like we were lab rats." "No, Elena," I said softly. "I watched you like a man who had given you his home and his trust, waiting to see if there was a single shred of a soul behind that beautiful face. I gave you every opportunity to be the woman Julian deserved. You chose to be the woman who stole a dead mother's ring from a locked box." I reached out my hand. "Give it back." "What?" "The ring. It's in your left pocket. Give it to me. Or the next person you speak to won't be a doctor. It will be the sheriff, who is currently parked at the end of the driveway, waiting for my signal." Her face twisted, a mask of beauty finally shattered by greed. She reached into her pocket and threw the diamond ring onto the table. It skittered across the wood, stopping right in the center of the red wine stain. "You think you've won?" Elena hissed. "You're still a lonely old man in a big empty house. Julian hates you. Marcus despises you. You have nothing." "I have the truth," I said. "And for the first time in 40 years, I don't have to carry any of you." I looked at Julian. He was weeping now, silent, shoulder-shaking sobs. He was a man who had tried to commit a terrible act and failed even at that. "Julian," I said, "the firm is gone. I signed the dissolution papers this afternoon. The offshore debt Marcus created, I've moved the liability. It doesn't sit with the company anymore. It sits with the individual who signed the authorization forms." Marcus looked up, his eyes bulging. "What? Arthur, no, you can't." "I can, Marcus. Because you were so eager to have Julian sign those papers, you didn't notice the clause I inserted into the power of attorney you were so desperate for me to sign. By signing it, you didn't gain control of my estate. You assumed the legal responsibility for the restructured debts of the firm. You didn't steal my fortune, brother. You volunteered to own my losses." The color didn't just leave Marcus's face, it seemed to leave his very soul. He realized then that the treasure he had been hunting was a mountain of legal and financial rubble, and he had just tied himself to the base of it. "Some people confuse unconditional love with permanent access," I said, picking up the flashlight. "Tonight, the access ends." I walked toward the door. "Where are you going?" Julian cried out, his voice small and terrified. "Dad, don't leave us here in the dark." I stopped at the threshold. I didn't look back. "The dark is where you chose to live, Julian," I said. "I'm just finally giving you the environment you've earned. I'm going to the library to wait for the authorities. I suggest you use this time to say goodbye to each other, because by morning, none of you will have a home to come back to." I stepped into the hallway. The house was silent, save for the sound of my own footsteps and the distant, rhythmic ticking of the clock. But then, a new sound emerged from the dining room. It wasn't a scream. It wasn't a cry for help. It was the sound of them turning on each other. The sound of Elena's voice, sharp and vitriolic, and Marcus's desperate, sniveling defense. The vultures had no more meat to pick from me, so they had begun to eat one another. I walked into the library and closed the door. I sat in my wingback chair and looked at the portrait of Martha. "It's done," I whispered. But as I sat there, I felt a strange, cold sensation in my left arm. A dull, heavy throb began in my chest. I looked down at my hand. It was shaking. For the first time in my life, it was shaking. I looked at the wine glass I had carried with me from the table. I had only taken a sip. But Julian hadn't just put an emetic in the wine. He was my son. He was smarter than I gave him credit for. He knew I would anticipate a move. I realized then that there was a second vial. The pain was not a sharp strike, but a slow, heavy expansion, as if an iron bloom were opening inside my ribs. I looked at my hand in the beam of the flashlight. It continued to tremble, a rhythmic, alien shaking that I could not command to stop. I've spent 40 years commanding things: timber, steel, employees, my own emotions. To have a part of my own body rebel felt like the ultimate betrayal. You always thought you were the only one who knew how to build a trap, Dad. The voice came from the shadows by the library door. I didn't have to turn the light to know it was Julian. He sounded different. The frantic, high-pitched edge of his voice from the dining room was gone, replaced by a flat, terrifyingly hollow resonance. I managed to breathe, though the air felt like it was being pulled through a wet cloth. The wine. What was in it, Julian? He walked into the faint circle of reflected light. He wasn't holding a weapon. He was holding his own wine glass, still half full. You saw me in the cellar. You saw the amber vial. You did exactly what I expected you to do. You played the hero. You switched the poison for an emetic to teach us a lesson. You wanted to watch us suffer, to watch us crawl, while you sat there with your moral superiority and your scotch. He took a slow, deliberate sip of his own wine. But you didn't check the bottles, Dad, he whispered. The emetic you put in, it reacted with the one thing I actually put in the wine this afternoon. Before I ever went to the cellar. Before I ever gave you a reason to watch me. The iron bloom in my chest tightened. My vision began to swim with silver sparks. The blue pills, I breathed. Julian nodded. Digitalis and a heavy sedative. Elena thought she was being clever, giving them to you one by one to make you compliant. But I've been the one holding the prescription bottle for months. I didn't put them in the vial. I dissolved them into the corks of the vintage you love so much. The wine absorbed it for hours. When you added your emetic, you created a cocktail that doesn't just make a man sick. It makes his heart forget how to beat. I leaned back in the wingback chair. The portrait of Martha seemed to be receding into a dark tunnel. Why? I managed to ask. I gave you everything. You gave me a life I couldn't lead, Julian finally snapped, the hollow tone breaking into a jagged cry. You gave me a company that was a monument to your ego. You gave me a name that felt like a cage. Every time I looked at you, I saw a man who never failed, which meant I was a man who could never succeed. You didn't raise a son, Arthur. You curated a successor. And when I wasn't perfect, you started looking at me like I was a faulty blueprint. He stepped closer, the flashlight on the table carving his face into a mask of grief. I didn't want the money. I didn't even want the house. I just wanted you to look at me once, just once, and see something other than a disappointment. But you couldn't do that. You were too busy being the silent patriarch, too busy observing our sins to notice your own. I tried to speak, to tell him about the forensic accountant, about Marcus's theft, about the fact that I was trying to save him from a prison sentence, but the words wouldn't form. My tongue felt thick, heavy as lead. I'm not going to let you win this one, Dad, Julian said, his voice dropping back to that terrifying calm. You wanted a demolition? You've got one. But you're not going to be the one standing in the rubble watching us fall. We're all going down together. I heard a sound from the hallway, the heavy rhythmic thud of someone falling. Marcus. Then, the shrill panicked scream of Elena, followed by a sudden, jarring silence. The sedative was working. The house was becoming a tomb of sleep. I called the police before I came in here, Julian said, sitting on the floor at my feet. leaning his head against the side of my chair, just like he used to when he was 6 years old. I told them there was a domestic tragedy in progress. I told them you had finally snapped. By the time they get through the signal jammer and the locked gates, we'll all be resting. They'll find the papers Marcus stole. They'll find the ring in Elena's pocket, and they'll find the wine you poisoned to stop them. He reached up and took my shaking hand in his. His grip was cold. "It's okay, Dad," he whispered. "The foundation is gone. You can stop holding us up now." I felt the darkness closing in. The ticking of the grandfather clock in the hall seemed to slow down, the gaps between the seconds growing wider and wider until they were vast, empty canyons. A man can survive 1,000 betrayals, but he cannot survive the realization that he raised the hand that strikes him. I had spent my life building a fortress to protect my family, never realizing that I had locked the monsters inside with me. But as my heart faltered, a single sharp thought pierced through the fog. Julian thought he had the only bottle. He thought he had the only plan. He forgot one thing about the man who built this house. I never put all my weight on a single beam. I forced my right hand, the one Julian wasn't holding, to move. It was an agonizing inch-by-inch crawl toward the underside of the library desk. My fingers brushed the cold metal of the emergency release. The police weren't the only ones I had called that morning. The button was small, no larger than a shirt stud, hidden in the grain of the underside of the mahogany. My finger found it not by sight, but by memory, the way a pianist finds middle C in the dark. I pressed it. There was no siren, no flashing lights, just the faint internal thrum of a high-capacity server cooling fan kicking on in the basement. Julian didn't notice. He was too busy leaning against my knee, his eyes half closed, drifting into the same chemical fog he'd prepared for me. He thought he was presiding over a funeral. He didn't realize he was being recorded. The button didn't just activate the server, it bypassed the signal jammer I'd placed in the library. It opened a dedicated encrypted line to a security firm in the city, men who were paid more for their discretion than for their muscles. They weren't the police Julian had called. They were my succession insurance. "You think I was a monument to myself," I said, the words dragging across my throat like sandpaper. My heart skipped a beat, then two, then hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm. Julian looked up, his expression dreamy, almost peaceful. "Weren't you? Everything in this house, everything in the firm, it was all Arthur's way. You never left room for me to be anything but a shadow of a man." "I left you the foundations," I whispered. "I built the walls high, so the world couldn't get to you. I didn't realize I was just keeping the rot inside." I felt the digitalis peaking. My chest felt as if it were being crushed by a slow-moving glacier, but I forced my eyes to stay open. I had to stay until they arrived. "You think you're taking us all down," I continued, my voice barely a breath. "But you're only taking yourself. The wine, Julian. The police will find the sediment. They'll find the pills in your pocket. They'll find the note on my pillow. You haven't made a tragedy. You've made a crime scene where you are the only suspect." Julian chuckled, a soft, wet sound. "It won't matter. We'll be gone. Elena, Marcus, you, and me. A clean slate, Dad. Finally. Nothing is ever clean, Julian. Blood, it leaves a stain even when you wash it. And you haven't even killed me yet." Down the hall, the front door didn't just open, it was removed. I heard the muffled professional thud of heavy boots on the Persian rug in the foyer. No sirens, no shouting. Just the clinical efficiency of the men I had hired to protect the patriarch from the very family he had built. Julian's head snapped toward the door. The peace in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, jagged panic. The police? They're already here? It's too soon. The wine hasn't... It's not the police, Julian, I said. A flashlight beam cut through the library darkness. A cold, white LED that made the room look like an operating theater. 2 men in tactical gear entered, followed by a man in a crisp charcoal suit. It was Elias. He wasn't just my forensic accountant. He was the executor of my contingency protocol. Elias looked at the scene. Julian slumped at my feet, the amber vial on the floor, and me, gray-faced and shaking in my chair. Arthur, Elias said, his voice as neutral as a bank statement. You're off schedule. The signal came through 4 minutes ago. Julian, he improvised, I managed to say. The wine, digitalis, get the medical team. Elias nodded to one of the men. Within seconds, a medic was kneeling beside me, a blood pressure cuff snapping onto my arm, a syringe already prepared. What is this? Julian screamed, trying to scramble to his feet, but the sedative was already turning his legs to lead. Who are these people? Get out! This is my house. I'm the CEO. Elias looked down at my son with a pity so profound it was almost insulting. Actually, Julian, as of 4 p.m. today, you were removed from all boards and your power of attorney was revoked for cause, specifically, the misappropriation of company funds discovered during our audit. You are a guest in this house and a trespasser on this estate. No! Julian roared, a sound of pure primal agony. He lunged for Elias, but the second security guard caught him with one hand, pinned him to the floor with a terrifying ease. Dad, tell them to stop! I looked down at my son. I felt the needle sting my arm, the antidote, or perhaps just a stabilizer, and the iron bloom in my chest began to recede, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. I can't tell them anything, Julian, I said. You said it yourself. I'm just a ghost, and ghosts don't have a voice in the world of the living. The medic was checking my pulse, his face grim. He's in VTAC. We need to move him now. Hospital's on standby. As they lifted me onto a gurney, I saw Marcus and Elena being wheeled out of the dining room by another team. They were alive, but they were bound by the same chemical chains Julian had forged. They looked like dolls being moved into storage. Elias walked beside my gurney as they pushed me toward the foyer. And the recordings? I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. Everything is captured, Arthur, Elias said. The pantry talk, the bedroom theft, the confession tonight. The local police are being diverted to a secondary entrance. We'll hand over the evidence of the poisoning and the embezzlement. Your son, your brother, and your daughter-in-law won't be going to a funeral. They'll be going to a courtroom. I looked at the house as they wheeled me out. The high ceilings, the mahogany, the paintings Martha and I had picked out when we were young and full of hope. It was a beautiful, hollow shell, a monument to a man who had forgotten that a home is built with hearts, not just bricks. The cruelest thing a son can do is mistake his father's love for a lack of imagination. Julian thought he had imagined the only way out. He never realized that I had already built the exit. As they loaded me into the private ambulance, the night air was cold and sweet. I looked up at the stars, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of the medication taking hold. Elias, I whispered. He leaned in. Yes, Arthur? The house. Sell it. Sell everything. Don't leave a single brick standing in that name. And the proceeds? I looked at the dark silhouette of the estate, the place where I had sacrificed my life for a family that didn't exist. Give it to the people who actually build things, I said, not the ones who just wait for them to fall. The doors of the ambulance began to close. But then I saw a figure standing at the edge of the driveway, illuminated by the porch light. It was a young man, my grandson Leo, Julian's son from his first marriage. He was 18. I hadn't seen him in 3 years because Elena had convinced Julian he was a bad influence. Leo was standing there, a backpack slung over one shoulder, watching his entire world be dismantled and carried away in white vans. Our eyes met for a split second. In his gaze, I didn't see greed. I didn't see hatred. I saw a terrifying, heartbreaking confusion. I realized then that the demolition wasn't over. I had removed the rot, but I had also removed the only world the boy knew. "Wait!" I croaked, reaching out a shaking hand. But the doors clicked shut, sealing me into the silence I had spent 40 years perfecting. The button was small, no larger than a shirt stud, hidden in the grain of the underside of the mahogany. My finger found it not by sight, but by memory, the way a pianist finds middle C in the dark. I pressed it. There was no siren, no flashing lights, just the faint internal thrum of a high-capacity server cooling fan kicking on in the basement. Julian didn't notice. He was too busy leaning against my knee, his eyes half closed, drifting into the same chemical fog he'd prepared for me. He thought he was presiding over a funeral. He didn't realize he was being recorded. The button didn't just activate the server. It bypassed the signal jammer I'd placed in the library. It opened a dedicated encrypted line to a security firm in the city, men who were paid more for their discretion than for their muscles. They weren't the police Julian had called. They were my succession insurance. "You think..." I was a monument to myself, I said, the words dragging across my throat like sandpaper. My heart skipped a beat, then two, then hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm. Julian looked up, his expression dreamy, almost peaceful. "Weren't you? Everything in this house, everything in the firm, it was all Arthur's way. You never left room for me to be anything but a shadow of a man." "I left you the foundations," I whispered. "I built the walls high, so the world couldn't get to you. I didn't realize I was just keeping the rot inside." I felt the digitalis peaking. My chest felt as if it were being crushed by a slow-moving glacier. But I forced my eyes to stay open. I had to stay until they arrived. "You think you're taking us all down," I continued, my voice barely a breath. "But you're only taking yourself. The wine. Julian, the police will find the sediment. They'll find the pills in your pocket. They'll find the note on my pillow. You haven't made a tragedy. You've made a crime scene where you are the only suspect." Julian chuckled, a soft, wet sound. "It won't matter. We'll be gone. Elena, Marcus, you, and me. A clean slate, Dad. Finally. Nothing is ever clean, Julian. Blood, it leaves a stain even when you wash it. And you haven't even killed me yet." Down the hall, the front door didn't just open, it was removed. I heard the muffled, professional thud of heavy boots on the Persian rug in the foyer. No sirens, no shouting. Just the clinical efficiency of the men I had hired to protect the patriarch from the very family he had built. Julian's head snapped toward the door. The peace in his eyes vanished, replaced by a sharp, jagged panic. "The police? They're already here? It's too soon. The wine hasn't..." "It's not the police, Julian," I said. A flashlight beam cut through the library darkness, a cold, white LED that made the room look like an operating theater. 2 men in tactical gear entered, followed by a man in a crisp charcoal suit. It was Elias. He wasn't just my forensic accountant. He was the executor of my contingency protocol. Elias looked at the scene. Julian slumped at my feet, the amber vial on the floor, and me, gray-faced and shaking in my chair. "Arthur," Elias said, his voice as neutral as a bank statement. "You're off schedule. The signal came through 4 minutes ago." "Julian..." "He improvised," I managed to say. "The wine. Digitalis, get the medical team." Elias nodded to one of the men. Within seconds, a medic was kneeling beside me, a blood pressure cuff snapping onto my arm, a syringe already prepared. "What is this?" Julian screamed, trying to scramble to his feet. But the sedative was already turning his legs to lead. "Who are these people? Get out! This is my house! I'm the CEO!" Elias looked down at my son, with a pity so profound it was almost insulting. "Actually, Julian, as of 4 p.m. today, you were removed from all boards and your power of attorney was revoked for cause. Specifically, the misappropriation of company funds discovered during our audit. You are a guest in this house, and a trespasser on this estate." "No!" Julian roared, a sound of pure primal agony. He lunged for Elias, but the second security guard caught him with one hand, pinned him to the floor with a terrifying ease. "Dad, tell them to stop!" I looked down at my son. I felt the needle sting my arm, the antidote, or perhaps just a stabilizer, and the iron bloom in my chest began to recede, replaced by a cold, hollow emptiness. "I can't tell them anything, Julian," I said. "You said it yourself. I'm just a ghost. And ghosts don't have a voice in the world of the living." The medic was checking my pulse, his face grim. "He's in VTAC. We need to move him now. Hospital's on standby." As they lifted me onto a gurney, I saw Marcus and Elena being wheeled out of the dining room by another team. They were alive, but they were bound by the same chemical chains Julian had forged. They looked like dolls being moved into storage. Elias walked beside my gurney as they pushed me toward the foyer. "And the recordings?" I asked, my voice a ghost of itself. "Everything is captured, Arthur," Elias said. "The pantry talk, the bedroom theft, the confession tonight. The local police are being diverted to a secondary entrance. We'll hand over the evidence of the poisoning and the embezzlement. Your son, your brother, and your daughter-in-law won't be going to a funeral. They'll be going to a courtroom." I looked at the house as they wheeled me out. The high ceilings, the mahogany, the paintings Martha and I had picked out when we were young and full of hope. It was a beautiful, hollow shell. A monument to a man who had forgotten that a home is built with hearts, not just bricks. The cruelest thing a son can do is mistake his father's love for a lack of imagination. Julian thought he had imagined the only way out. He never realized that I had already built the exit. As they loaded me into the private ambulance, the night air was cold and sweet. I looked up at the stars, feeling the slow, steady rhythm of the medication taking hold. "Elias," I whispered. He leaned in. "Yes, Arthur?" "The house. Sell it. Sell everything. Don't leave a single brick standing in that name." "And the proceeds?" I looked at the dark silhouette of the estate, the place where I had sacrificed my life for a family that didn't exist. "Give it to the people who actually build things," I said, "not the ones who just wait for them to fall." The doors of the ambulance began to close, but then I saw a figure standing at the edge of the driveway, illuminated by the porch light. It was a young man. My grandson, Leo, Julian's son from his first marriage. He was 18. I hadn't seen him in 3 years because Elena had convinced Julian he was a bad influence. Leo was standing there, a backpack slung over one shoulder, watching his entire world be dismantled and carried away in white vans. Our eyes met for a split second. In his gaze, I didn't see greed. I didn't see hatred. I saw a terrifying, heartbreaking confusion. I realized then that the demolition wasn't over. I had removed the rot, but I had also removed the only world the boy knew. "Wait!" I croaked, reaching out a shaking hand. But the doors clicked shut, sealing me into the silence I had spent 40 years perfecting. The hospital is a place of white noise and fluorescent hums, a different kind of silence than the one I built in the library. Here, the silence is sterile. It smells of bleach and ozone, a sharp contrast to the oak and old paper of my home. They have me in a private wing, under a name that isn't mine. Elias handles the paperwork with the same cold efficiency he used to dismantle my brother's shell companies. To the world, Arthur Vance is a man in critical condition, a victim of a tragic family accident. To me, I am simply a man waiting for the dust to settle so I can see what's left of the horizon. The digitalis left a residual ache in my chest, a phantom weight that reminds me of Julian's head resting on my knee. Every time I close my eyes, I see him there, the man who tried to kill me, holding my hand like a child afraid of the dark. Elias entered my room on the third day. He didn't bring flowers. He brought a digital tablet and a stack of legal notices. "They're out of the hospital," Elias said, pulling a chair to the bedside. "Marcus and Elena. The dosage they took was lower. The emetic you swapped in did most of the work, though it wasn't pleasant for them. Julian is still under psychiatric observation in the secure wing. He's not talking." "And the charges?" I asked. My voice was stronger now, though it lacked its old resonance. "Assault with a deadly substance, attempted grand larceny, and a litany of financial crimes Elias is currently feeding to the district attorney. But there's a complication." I looked at the heart monitor. The green line peaked and dipped in a perfect mechanical rhythm. "There's always a complication when people are involved, Elias. What is it?" "The boy, Leo." I felt a slight hitch in my pulse. The monitor beeped a fraction faster. "What about him?" "He was there that night because he'd run away from his mother's house in the city. He'd found out about Elena and Marcus weeks ago. He'd been recording them too, Arthur. Not for money, not for leverage. He just wanted to show his father. He wanted to save Julian from the vultures, as he called them." I closed my eyes. The image of Leo standing in the driveway, the backpack slung over his shoulder, took on a new, sharper pain. He wasn't a witness to my demolition. He was a casualty of his own attempt at loyalty. "He was in the guest house when the security team arrived," Elias continued. "He saw Marcus and Elena being led out in zip ties. He saw his father being carried out on a stretcher, screaming your name. He thinks you did this to destroy them all. He doesn't know about the wine. He doesn't know they tried to kill you first." "He saw the result, not the cause," I whispered. "That is the tragedy of every legacy. The children only see the ruins. They never remember why the war was fought. He's refusing to go back to his mother. He's 18 now, legally an adult, but he has nothing. No access to the trust, which you've frozen, and no home since you've ordered the sale of the estate." I looked out the window at the city skyline. Somewhere out there, my grandson was wandering through the wreckage I had created to save myself. I had removed the load-bearing walls, but I had forgotten that Leo was still under the roof. Where is he now? In a motel near the university. I sent a runner to offer him a stipend, but he threw the check back in the man's face. He said he doesn't want blood money from a man who buries his own son. I felt a cold, familiar resolve hardening in my gut. This is what the others never understood. They thought my silence was a sign of my heart stopping. They didn't realize that silence is where I do my most difficult work. Tell the DA to delay the formal indictments for 48 hours, I said. Elias frowned. Arthur, we have them. The evidence is airtight. If we wait, Marcus's lawyers might find a way to muddy the waters regarding the financial liability. Let them muddy it. I want them to think they have a chance. I want Marcus and Elena to feel the first spark of hope, that maybe, just maybe, the old man is too weak to follow through. Why? Because greed is a form of gravity, I said, looking Elias in the eye. When you give people like Marcus a little bit of rope, they don't use it to climb out of the hole. They use it to try and pull you back in. And while they're focused on me, I'm going to go see my grandson. You're in no condition to leave this bed, Arthur. I've spent 40 years building things that were meant to last, Elias. If I can't stand for 10 minutes to talk to the only member of my bloodline who isn't a predator, then the digitalis should have finished the job. I checked myself out against medical advice that evening. I didn't take the limousine. I had Elias hire a nondescript black sedan. I wore a simple overcoat, covering the hospital wristband I hadn't yet cut off. The motel was a drab, two-story affair on the edge of the industrial district. It smelled of damp carpet and despair. I found room 214 and knocked. The door opened, and Leo stood there. He looked like his father, the same jawline, the same earnest eyes, but there was a hardness in him that Julian never possessed. A hardness I recognized from my own reflection in the years after the war. "What do you want, grandfather?" he asked. He didn't move to let me in. "Come to see if there's anything left to break?" "I came to show you the blueprints, Leo," I said, leaning heavily on my cane. "The ones your father never bothered to look at." He stared at me, his lip curling. "I don't care about your money. I saw what it did to them. I saw what you did to them." "You saw me survive, Leo. There is a difference." I stepped forward, forcing him to either move or let me fall. He moved. The room was tiny, cluttered with textbooks and a cheap laptop. On the desk, however, was something that stopped my breath. It was a handheld digital recorder, identical to the one I had used in the pantry. Beside it was a stack of Polaroids, blurry, hurried shots of Marcus and Elena in the gardens. Marcus handing envelopes to men in dark suits. Elena's car parked at a motel. Leo hadn't just been recording them, he'd been building a case. "I was going to give it to you," Leo said, his voice cracking. "On your birthday. I thought, if you saw what they were doing, you'd help Dad. You'd fix it. I didn't think you'd call in a private army and erase us." "I didn't erase you, Leo. I pruned a dying tree so the roots wouldn't rot." "My father is in a padded cell because of you." "Your father is in that cell because he chose to put digitalis in my wine instead of coming to me with the truth," I said, my voice dropping into that low, devastating register. "He chose the poison, Leo. I just chose not to swallow it." I sat on the edge of the bed, the exertion of the trip starting to make the world tilt. "You think you're different from me," I said, gesturing to the recorder on the desk. "But look at you. You sat in the dark. You observed. You waited. You collected the truth while everyone else was busy lying. You're more like me than Julian ever was." Leo looked at the recorder, then back at me. The hatred in his eyes was being fought by a dawning, terrifying realization. "I'm not like you," he whispered. "I don't hate my family." "Neither do I," I said. "You don't perform a controlled demolition because you hate the building. You do it because the building is a threat to the neighborhood. And right now, Leo, the neighborhood is you." I reached into my coat and pulled out a single, ancient key. Not to the house, but to a safety deposit box I'd maintained since before he was born. Inside that box isn't money, I said. It's a set of documents that Marcus and Elena would kill for. It's the proof that your father isn't actually the legal owner of the firm's debt. I am. I've been carrying it for him, secretly, for years. If those papers go to the DA, Julian goes to prison for life. If they disappear, Julian walks free on a technicality, but Marcus and Elena lose everything they've ever touched. I held the key out to him. My hand was steady again. You want to save your father? Here is the price. You have to decide who survives the collapse, the man who tried to kill me or the people who turned him into a murderer. Leo looked at the key, then at me. Why are you giving this to me? Why not just do it yourself? Because, I said, standing up with a groan of effort, I'm an old man, and I'm tired of being the only one who knows where the bodies are buried. It's time you learned how to handle a shovel. I walked to the door, but before I opened it, I turned back. One more thing, Leo. The motel bill is paid for a month, but tomorrow morning, Marcus is going to be released on bail. He doesn't know about the key, but he knows you were at the house that night. And Marcus has always been very good at finding things that don't belong to him. I stepped out into the cold night air, leaving him alone with the key and the weight of a family's life. As the sedan pulled away, I looked back at the motel window. I saw Leo's silhouette against the curtain. He was holding the key up to the light. I leaned my head against the cool glass of the window. I had lied to him. Marcus wasn't being released on bail. I had made sure of that. I just needed to see if Leo would use the key to save his father, or if he'd use it to open the door for Marcus. The estate was no longer a home, it was a carcass. When the sedan pulled through the iron gates an hour later, the floodlights were gone, replaced by the flickering orange glow of a single security lamp near the garage. The silence here was different now. It wasn't the heavy, watchful silence of a man keeping secrets. It was the hollow, echoing silence of a tomb that had been robbed. I walked through the front door, my cane tapping a lonely rhythm on the marble. The air smelled of dust and the faint, lingering scent of Elena's perfume, that metallic lily that now made my stomach turn. Movers had already begun tagging the furniture. Green stickers for auction, red stickers for disposal, blue stickers for storage. My life was being color-coded by strangers in denim jumpsuits. I made my way to the dining room. The red wine stain was still there, a dark, jagged map on the white tablecloth, dried into a permanent bruise. I sat at my place at the foot of the table and turned off my flashlight. I wanted to sit in the dark. I wanted to feel the weight of what I had done. A man's home is his castle until his family realizes they can sell the stones. I had spent 40 years laying those stones, believing I was building a sanctuary. In reality, I was just building a more expensive cage. You shouldn't be here, Arthur. I didn't turn around. I knew the voice. It was Elias. He was standing in the shadows by the sideboard, his tablet glowing like a small rectangular moon. I have nowhere else to be, Elias. A man in my position is either in a hospital, a grave, or a museum. I've already tried the first. I'm not ready for the second, and I'm currently sitting in the third. Elias walked into my line of sight. Leo went to the bank. I felt a slight tightening in my throat. Which one? The one the key belongs to. He was there 10 minutes after the doors opened this morning. He didn't take a taxi. He walked 3 miles in the rain. And? He didn't take the documents, Arthur. He sat in the private viewing room for 2 hours. The manager said he didn't even open the folder. He just sat there, looking at it. Then he locked the box, handed the key back to the teller, and walked out. I leaned back, closing my eyes. He's smarter than I was at 18. He knows that once you look at the truth, you can never unsee it. He's trying to preserve the version of his father he still loves. Or he's waiting for a better offer, Elias said, his voice clipped. Because while Leo was at the bank, Elena's lawyer was at the courthouse. She's filed for a protective discovery. She claims she has evidence that the signal jammer and the recording devices in this house weren't for security. She's claiming you've been systematically recording her in private moments for years. She's going for a voyeuristic harassment defense to invalidate the pantry tapes. I let out a dry, rattling laugh. She's a predator to the end. She thinks if she can make the old man look like a pervert, the jury will forget she was trying to poison him. It's working on the local press, Arthur. The headlines are already turning. The reclusive patriarch and his secret cameras. If she breaks the validity of those tapes, we lose the evidence of the premeditation. She'll walk with a suspended sentence and a massive civil suit for emotional distress. I looked at the wine stain. She won't walk, Elias, because Elena forgot the most important rule of the hunt. You don't look for the trap you can see. You look for the one you can't. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat and pulled out a small, leather-bound ledger. It wasn't one of the ones from the office. It was older, the edges frayed. "What is that?" Elias asked. "It's a diary," I said, "but not mine. It belonged to Elena's mother. I've had it for 5 years. I bought it from a private collector in Florida shortly after Julian brought her home for the first time." Elias took the book, flipping through the pages. His eyes widened as he read. This describes the same pattern, the accidental falls, the confusion of the elderly. This isn't the first time Elena has done this, is it? "She was 22, I said, "in Sarasota, a wealthy developer. He died of natural causes 3 months after they married. The daughter tried to fight the will, but Elena was too fast. She disappeared with $6 million and a new name. I knew who she was the moment she stepped into this house." Elias looked at me, a look of genuine horror crossing his face. "You knew? You knew she was a professional, and you let her marry your son? You let her move into your home?" "I wanted Julian to be happy, Elias," I whispered, and for the first time my voice broke. "He was so desperate for someone to love him, for something other than his inheritance. I thought if I kept her close, I could control her. I thought I could outmaneuver her. I thought my silence was a shield." I stood up, the pain in my chest flaring up, a hot needle behind my ribs. "I was wrong," I continued. "I let a wolf into the nursery because I thought I was a better hunter. And now my son is in a psych ward. My brother is a broken thief, and my grandson is a nomad. My silence wasn't a shield, Elias. It was a shroud." "What do you want to do with the diary?" "Keep it. We don't give it to the police, not yet. We wait until Elena takes the stand. We wait until she tells the world what a monster I am. I want her to build her tower of lies as high as it will go. And then I'm going to pull the bottom stone," I said. "But before that, I need to see Marcus, not through a glass partition. I want to be in the room with him. Arthur, he hates you. He'll try to kill you." "Marcus doesn't have the stomach for murder, Elias. He only has the stomach for theft. He doesn't want me dead. He wants me to apologize for being right." I walked toward the foyer, the empty rooms of the house feeling like they were closing in on me. I stopped at the bottom of the stairs, looking up at the darkness of the second floor. "Elias," I said, without turning around. "Yes, Arthur?" "Did Leo leave a message at the bank?" There was a long pause. I heard the rustle of Elias's coat. "He did," Elias said softly. "He told the teller to tell you that the foundation isn't just made of stone. It's made of blood. And blood doesn't wash out of a house, no matter how much you sell it for." I stood there for a long time, the words echoing in the hollow space of my chest. I had spent my life trying to protect my legacy, only to realize that the only person worth leaving it to was the one person who wanted nothing to do with it. I walked out of the house and into the waiting car. "Take me to the county lockup," I told the driver. "I have a debt to collect from my brother." As we drove away, I looked back at the house one last time. A light was on in the library. I hadn't left it on. My heart skipped a beat. "Stop the car," I whispered. But as the driver slowed, the light went out. It wasn't a mover. It wasn't a ghost. Someone was in the house. Someone who knew exactly where the shadows were deepest. The county lockup is a sensory assault. It smells of institutional floor wax, unwashed fear, and the metallic tang of old pipes. It is a place designed to strip a man of his dignity before he even sees a judge. For Marcus, a man who lived his life wrapped in Italian silk and the scent of my most expensive scotch, it must have been a special kind of hell. I sat behind the thick plexiglass in the visiting room, my cane hooked over the edge of the metal stool. My chest ached with every breath, the digitalis still whispering to my heart, telling it to slow down, to stop, to rest. But I couldn't rest. Not yet. Marcus was led in by a guard. He looked smaller. The orange jumpsuit hung off his frame, and the charming, easy smile he'd worn for 60 years had been replaced by a frantic, twitching mask. His hair, usually perfectly coiffed, was a greasy mess. He picked up the receiver. His hand was shaking, not with a heart condition, but with the raw, vibrating terror of a man who has finally been caught by the shadow he's been running from his entire life. "Artie," he croaked. "Artie, thank God. You have to get me out of here. The lawyers, they're saying the DA is going for the maximum. They're talking about the predatory nature of the financial transfers. They don't understand, Artie. I was just trying to keep the firm afloat. I was doing it for Julian." I didn't pick up the receiver for a long time. I just looked at him. I looked at the man I had bailed out of gambling debts in the 80s, whose divorces I had paid for in the 90s, and whose hollow consulting fees had been a line item on my ledger for decades. I finally lifted the phone. "The firm is gone, Marcus. I dissolved it. There is nothing left to keep afloat." Marcus's eyes darted around the room. "You can't do that. That's my legacy too. I'm a Vance. You can't just erase the name because you're angry." "I'm not angry, Marcus. I'm exhausted. There is a difference. Anger is a fire that needs fuel. Exhaustion is just the realization that the wood has all turned to ash." "Listen to me," Marcus hissed, leaning closer to the glass. "Elena, she's not going to stay quiet. She's got things, Artie. Records. She told me she has photos from the old days, from before Martha died. She says she can prove you weren't the saintly husband everyone thinks you were. She's going to burn it all down if you don't drop the charges." I felt a cold, familiar stillness settle over me. "The cruelest thing you can do to a brother, Marcus, is to be his savior for so long that he forgets how to be a man. I made you a parasite, and now you're surprised that you've run out of blood to drink?" "I'm not talking about the money!" Marcus yelled, his voice cracking. A few other inmates turned to look. "I'm talking about survival. Elena is dangerous. You think you're the one who caught her? She wanted you to find those bank statements. She wanted to trigger the collapse. She's playing a game you don't even know the rules to." "And what game is that?" Marcus looked down at his shackled hands. "She wasn't just after the inheritance. She's been talking to someone, Artie. Someone who's been looking for you for a long time. Someone from the Sarasota days." My heart gave a sharp, agonizing thud. The room seemed to grow colder. "Who, Marcus?" "I don't know a name," he whispered. "But the light you saw in the library, that wasn't a ghost. That was the broker." She's selling the files, Artie. Every secret, every ledger, every shady deal you did to build that empire. She's not trying to win the court case. She's just trying to hold the door open long enough for the past to walk in. I hung up the phone. I didn't say goodbye. I didn't look back as the guard led him away, still shouting my name through the glass. I walked out of the jail and into the cool evening air. Elias was waiting by the car. "What did he say?" Elias asked, seeing the look on my face. "He said that I've been so busy watching the wolves in my house that I didn't notice the hunter at the gate." I looked at my hand. It was steady. Too steady. The adrenaline of the old life, the one I thought I'd buried with Martha, was pumping through my veins again. "Elias, where's the diary? The one from Elena's mother." "It's in the safe at the office. Why?" "Because," I said, stepping into the car, "I need to look at the last page again." There was a name mentioned. A name I thought was just a doctor, but now I think it was a warning. As the car pulled away, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. No words, just a photo. It was a picture of the library, my wingback chair, empty. And on the seat of the chair sat a single white lily, the kind Elena always kept in the house. But the lily was black, charred at the edges, as if it had been held in a flame. I realized then that the light I saw in the library hadn't been an accident. It had been an invitation. "Driver," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "Forget the office. Go back to the house, now." "Arthur, you can't," Elias protested. "The security team said the house is clear." "The security team is looking for intruders," I said, looking out at the passing street lights. "I'm looking for a debt that's 40 years overdue." The house did not groan as I entered. It held its breath. The silence was different now, no longer the heavy, waiting silence of a home, but the hollow, metallic stillness of a tomb. The air was cold, the power remained off, the darkness thick enough to feel against my skin. I moved by the narrow beam of my flashlight, the circle of light dancing over the disposal stickers on the furniture. I reached the library door. It was ajar. I didn't hesitate. I pushed it open. The beam of my light cut through the gloom, landing not on a stranger, but on the high-backed wing-back chair. It was turned toward the window, facing the skeletal oaks that guarded the estate. On the small side table sat the black, charred lily, and beside it, a glass of my 18-year-old scotch. "You're late, Arthur," a voice said. It wasn't Marcus. It wasn't the broker. It was Julian. He was sitting in the chair, his face illuminated by the pale moonlight filtering through the glass. He wasn't in a padded cell. He looked clean, his suit pressed, his eyes clear and terrifyingly sharp. "How?" I whispered, my heart giving a sickening, irregular thud. "Elias," Julian said simply. "You taught him well, Dad. You taught him that loyalty is a commodity, and that the man with the most to lose is the one most likely to overpay. I didn't have to buy him. I just had to remind him that you were a dying man, and I was the heir to the rubble." I leaned against the doorframe, my cane trembling. "The hospital. The psych ward. A performance. One I learned from you. If you want people to stop looking at you, you become a ghost. You become the broken son. It's the perfect camouflage for a man who's busy moving the foundations." Julian stood up. He looked taller than I remembered. The insecurity that had plagued him for 40 years was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical precision that mirrored my own. "I didn't put the digitalis in the wine for Elena or Marcus, Dad," Julian said, walking toward me. "I put it there for you. I knew you'd find the vial. I knew you'd save us by switching it. I needed you to feel what it's like to have your own heart turn against you. I needed you to understand that the silent patriarch is only powerful as long as the house stands." and I've been digging under this house since I was 12 years old." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the small, leather-bound diary, the one belonging to Elena's mother. The one Elias was supposed to have in the safe. "You thought Elena was the predator," Julian laughed, a dry, hollow sound. "You thought you found her in Florida to watch her. But I'm the one who sent her to Sarasota. I'm the one who gave her the name of the man you ruined in 1978. I didn't bring a wolf into the nursery, Dad. I brought a specialist." The room seemed to tilt. The Sarasota days, the man I had crushed to build my firm. I had thought I was the hunter, curating Elena's presence to keep her under my thumb. In reality, she had been a weapon Julian had been sharpening for a decade. "Why?" I choked out. "Everything I built, it was for you." "No," Julian hissed, stepping into the light of my flashlight. "It was for you. It was so you could look in the mirror and see a king. You didn't give me a life, Arthur. You gave me a script. And tonight, I'm finally closing the play." He leaned in close, his breath smelling of the scotch I had bought to celebrate my own survival. "I'm not going to jail, Dad. Marcus is. Elena is. I've handed the DA everything. The recordings you made, the ledgers I forged in Marcus's hand, the harassment files Elias helped me compile. You're going to spend your final days as a tragic victim of a senile mind. The world will pity you. They'll talk about how the great Arthur Vance lost his grip at the end." He reached out and gently took the flashlight from my hand. He turned it off. We stood in the absolute crushing dark. "I've sold the land, Arthur. Not to a developer, to a demolition crew. They start at dawn. By noon, there won't be a single brick left of your legacy. And Leo? Leo is already on a plane to Europe. He has the money. He has a new name. He's the only one who gets to walk away clean. Because I'm the only one who loved him enough to lie to him." Julian's hand found my shoulder. It was the same touch he'd used as a child, but now it felt like the weight of a mountain. "Go to the guest house, Dad. Elias is waiting to take you to the Willows. It's a nice room. It has a view of the garden. You can sit in your silence there for as long as you have left. No more observing, no more remembering, just silence." He walked past me, his footsteps light and sure on the marble he was about to destroy. I stayed in the library. I didn't go to the guest house. I walked to my wingback chair and sat down. My heart was a faint, stuttering rhythm, a clock finally running out of gears. I looked at the charred lily on the table. A father builds a house to protect his children from the world. A patriarch builds a house to protect the world from his children. I had failed at both. I had spent 40 years thinking I was the architect of their lives, never realizing that I was simply the floor they were waiting to tear up. As the first gray light of dawn began to bleed through the library windows, I heard the heavy mechanical roar of the bulldozers idling at the gate. I didn't move. I didn't reach for the phone. I didn't call Elias. I picked up the glass of scotch Julian had left for me. I took a slow, deliberate sip. It was bitter. It was metallic. It was exactly the ending I had designed 30 years ago, when I first realized that the only way to truly own a secret is to be the only one left to tell it. I reached under the arm of the chair and pulled out a small, handheld transmitter. It wasn't for security. It wasn't for recording. It was the final foundation. Julian thought he was the one who invited the demolition. He forgot that I was the one who poured the concrete. And in the concrete of this library, under the very floor where he had stood, I had buried the only thing that could actually destroy the Vance name. The true ledger. The one that proved the ruined man in Sarasota wasn't a victim, but a partner. The one that proved the firm was built on a lie so vast it would swallow everyone, Julian, Leo, and the ghost of Martha. If the house falls, the ledger stays buried. If the house stands, the truth remains a threat. I looked at the red button on the transmitter. Children rarely notice a father disappearing until the things he paid for start disappearing with him. But a father only truly disappears when he decides that the legacy isn't worth the blood it costs to keep it. I pressed the button. There was no explosion, no cinematic roar, just the faint, distant hiss of the gas lines I had compromised weeks ago, finally meeting the spark I had set in the basement. I leaned back in the chair and closed my eyes. The warmth began to rise from the floorboards, a soft, golden glow that felt, for the first time in decades, like a hug. The silent patriarch was finally finished with his confession. The house didn't scream as it went. It simply exhaled.